another one of our wonderful masterclasses with Reinhold Bidner. He's joining us from Vienna in Austria. And without further ado, I turn over to him. And we are so happy to have him and his, and his wonderful films or like his masterclass in our festival. So welcome, Reinhold, and please introduce yourself. And
hello. Thanks to Animatricks for inviting me. And I think I also have, if I'm correct, I also have to say thanks to Austrian embassy or something because they supported somehow. So yes, my name is Reinhold Bidner, and I think I will directly share the screen because it should not be about my face, but rather about some works that I created. So I will try and let's see if everything works. I'll try again to share this one. So I hope you can see that one now.
yes, we can see it. Yes.
Okay, so my masterclass, I called it Encounters and Inbetweens. Well, some of you may know the term of in-betweens, I guess, coming from the animation side. And I hope I can tell you somewhere in the next slides or in the next 40, 50 minutes what my title is about. So, yes, let's see. Hello, next slide. Ah, yeah, here it is. Yeah, maybe at first I'd like to give a little structure of what I want to say or what I'm trying to say. So I'm not necessarily totally from the animation side. I'm somewhere, and that's why the title is also with in-betweens. I'm in between fields somehow, like, of course, there's a lot of focus on animation, but, like, I like to call it artistic experiments in various fields that I would like to give you an overview of. It's, I think, in my case, better than to show you this one particular project, but rather like I'd like to give you an overview concerning my individual artistic experiments, but also concerning two collectives that I'm part of or have been part of. On the one hand, called Extra. There's a current project that I will talk about, and also In Out, which is a different collective that I have been part of. And yeah, at the end, it should also be about, or it should, hopefully that's maybe helpful for people listening, about some experiences I made and maybe also about some lessons that you learn when you work, like in my case now, quite some years already in these fields.
Mhm.
So to give you, sorry.
Sorry, yeah, just a second. I forgot to mention, a good point to mention is now that we also have our chat line open because this is a live masterclass. So if you have questions for Reinhold, you can send them to our chat line, and then after his presentation, I'm going to read them to him. So yes, we have this interactive system. So, yeah, sorry, I
Cool.
forgot to mention it. Yeah, please go on. Yes.
I promise stupid answers.
Excellent.
Anyway, I thought it's a good idea to give a little bit of a context with that. I mean, first of all, my film called Utopia C is here as part of the animated documentary competition, and I will not talk a lot about it, so I'll try to do here now a little bit. It is basically, it was created, it's some sort of diary during lockdown one and an animated diary. So, and it's a lot about, and that's what I like to do quite often in my work. This is just a teaser, so just a few shots. And I decided to show here some videos without sounds because I like, in that case, I rather like to talk on top of it. So in that case, and it's in some of my works, it's about taking a look at things and, like being on a journey, traveling, and the things that I see, and maybe trying to create animated fragments out of that. And in that case, well, as we all experienced lockdowns in the last 1.5 years, and this is, from the time of lockdown number one, which to my mind had a little bit of magic as well, like in the sense of, okay, everything came to a halt and you had to think different. It was not about traveling anymore. It was about, shut down. And in lockdown 1, this was quite interesting. It became, of course, more and more uninteresting to all of us. But in that case, and this animated film is about, it's about 7.5 minutes, and it's about my view on hometown or my home area. You know, like I was walking by incident, I was in my home area, which is in Salzburg, and just what I saw around my house, like what I experienced. And it's about, like, quite many of animated fragments, like that I put into an animated diary, sort of. Yes. And of course, I'm happy that it's being shown here. In general, the context about Austrian animation, we are not totally famous, I would say, concerning animation, but at first maybe rather famous about experimental film and all these experiments with material, etc. Nevertheless, sooner or later, quite vivid and interesting, to my mind, animation scene came out of it, like also very experimental, trying out things, usually, I guess, rather low budgets, I would say, but like trying out and being interested in animation. And of course, some of the people in the festival circles are now already quite well known, I would say. I mean, it's quite sure some of you have heard Thomas Reinhold, of course, who's active since many years. Or, for example, this is a slide of Anna Vazov. She's also quite famous. Who else do we have here? For example, okay, Paul Wenninger is also quite well known. He's going to be in Annecy with a new film in a few weeks, etc., etc. So it's and of course also other fields like the game, the quite interesting games that are also very nice in illustration terms are coming up, etc., etc. So there's a lot going on, to my mind. And I mentioned Thomas Reinhold before, and he is, on the one hand, he is organizing the 2 days animation festival with the best Austrian animation included. And since this year, in case you're interested, there's a best Austrian animation database where you can check out various films, or at least teasers and trailers, but I think also the full length films sometimes, if the animators wanted to share them. And yeah, that's quite interesting that this is existing since a few months. And yeah, I think the Austrian animation scene is quite happy about collecting and sharing and all of that. And maybe another context, yeah, quite many of you are well familiar, I guess, with ASIFA in general. So this association about animation, and there's an Austrian part of ASIFA, and they are also quite active. I'm also a member of ASIFA Austria since a few years, and they're also quite active in supporting filmmakers, supporting festivals, developing exhibitions. Like here, this is a still from an exhibition that is happening right now in Museums Quarter in Vienna. And yeah, and all that, I'm somehow involved. And yes, I created quite many things and experiments, on the one hand as an individual artist, as I said, and I will try to talk about some of those projects that you can see here. And on the other hand, what is coming now? Once again, about the title, Encounters and Inbetweens. Sorry, I give my watch somewhere else to have a little bit of an overview. How long am I talking?
And since you mentioned Thomas Reinhold, he's the spokesperson for the ASIFA Austria, isn't he? That you mentioned.
Well, he's part of the how's he called in English? He's part of the
curators. Maybe he's one of the curators.
There's 5 or 6 people who are sort of in the higher how to say.
Well, they're the board. Like they have a board. Like he's a board member.
Yes,
one of the,
yes.
Exactly.
A board. Some board members who are I of course have a little bit more to say than the other members, which are quite
because
many.
he is wonderful. I know him and his films, and he's such an active and wonderful person. So I think
his last film was Don't Know What. That was the title, and I think it's now online. Yeah. And yes, coming back to my title, Encounters and In-Betweens. In between, I mean somewhere, like shifting. I'm quite happy about shifting between fields and disciplines, as you can see them here, and also shifting between individual projects and, as I said, collective projects. So that's just my interest, that it's shifting and transforming, just as my animations are sometimes transforming. And and it's, I guess, a lot in my last years it was a lot about ups and downs, better projects, worse projects. And yes, what I want to mention from beforehand, on the one hand, our collective Gold Extra, which I will talk about, at least about two projects then, that are somehow different, of course, compared to my individual projects. Just to give you still an overview, but let's start with history, sort of. Basically, my first animation. And as I said, I want to give you an overview about also some learning processes, etc. So I'm talking about 2001. I'm talking about Berlin. I was doing my diploma there, and part of my diploma, besides a flipbook, was this animated movie. And what is still quite interesting to me about it is that the topic still is important to me. I wrote down there man or woman versus machine, so sort of the sort of slavery that we share with our machines. Back then in 2001, it was other ones. Or being this sort of slavery, and this being maybe controlled by something else, and this was topic of this film. And it's still now with other devices still somehow topic of of some of my projects or films. And it was quite funny in that case as well. um I didn't mention now, but on the one hand, it was quite funny. I submitted this. I heard of something called Mekon New Talent Award, which happened in Cologne in Germany. So I sent it in, and it was my first project. And basically, I suddenly they called me and told me, "Hey, you won third prize, so basically an award at Mekon New Talent Award," which was quite cool. So I went there. So I learned already back then, okay, if you have something and you're somehow at least a little bit happy with it, show it, tell it, submit it, etc. So this was of course a good kickoff for me for learning this. And the other thing that it says here is coincidences. So back then, as I said, I was in Berlin, but I didn't have a clue how to go on there, concerning money, etc. Because this is also part of this film. Like I had the feeling there was this army of creatives there. So like I didn't necessarily feel that maybe Berlin needs me, in the sense of the third million person creating something. So the fourth million one. And so anyway, through this animation, it happened anyway that I came to Linz, to Ars Electronica Future Lab, this institution is called. And they are about media art. This is the museum that they have in Linz. Back then it didn't look like this. They rebuilt it in 2009. And like for me it was a good experience to go there and to be really involved into media art and creating stuff, and being in such a interesting and important institution. And it happened by incident, basically, because you create something and suddenly something happens, some connection and some path is coming up. And by the way, yes, you all know this film, Luxo Junior by Pixar. Ars Electronica also established a pre-Ars Electronica, which also had a computer animation category besides interactive art, etc. And in 1987, I think there was the first pre-Ars Electronica, and Pixar won there with Luxo Junior. So somehow Pixar made Ars Electronica famous, or pre-Ars Electronica, and somehow I think also pre-Ars Electronica made Pixar famous. Back then they were, yes, creating 3D animated short films talking about 1987. And for me, all this thing was quite interesting, this whole thing being connected to such a interesting institution, and I created motion graphics there. I was doing visuals for events, animations for events, trailers, etc., etc. So quite heavily involved in the process of this institution. Some of the things were better, some of the things were worse, depending on the year and sometimes also the budget, etc. But of course, this was a huge learning process. But what was equally important, or maybe even more important back then, this time, like also sometimes being a bit, like having the drive or to do something on your own, not being part of an institution. So I was quite happy back then to meet some people and to establish my own projects. Like in that case, I met a guy called Christian Korher, just as it happens while drinking beer, and we got into talking, and sooner or later he comes from graphic design, and sooner or later we had the idea, hey, we could do an Austrian flipbook festival just out of talking, and suddenly we both said, yes, this is a good idea. And for me, it's quite important to include it here because I learned a lot out of it as well. It was, of course, it was quite, and it was really quite funny to then do this exhibition and opening and putting all the flip books down from the ceiling, and people had so much fun. It was, like sometimes I was criticizing, media art, etc. Already back then, it was about bigger and bigger projections, and like projecting on houses and architecture, etc., etc. And suddenly we had this stupid idea of showing flip books of people who are, for example, from the art university in Linz. But it was so much fun, and people had so much fun. It was, and it still was interactive at the end. And like here's just some shots of the wallpapers that we did. There was basically no budget. This flame, there's this wordplay. On the one hand, these names and these faces here that you can see a little bit are connected to politicians from Austria, like some critique, which we had fun of. And on the other hand, flipped is a wordplay. On the one hand, of course, from flipbook, but on the other hand, flipped means in German something like being angry, being screaming around and being angry, somehow like that. So this was all just fun for us, putting on a wall those, and they were hand painted, sort of the flames and stuff like this. We had a lot of fun creating cheap wallpapers that worked in the city. Anyway, I think here should come now some examples. Like for us, it was just so great which ideas people have concerning this simple thing of a flip book, which, you basically have a few seconds to tell a little story. And, we got all these submissions for example, in horror was the first one that you saw, and this one is documentary rather. And there was experimental and also for children, or in that case, it was advertising and so on and so on. So for me, also this was quite a huge learning process in the sense of, on the one hand being a filmmaker, but here now also on the other side, sort of organizing a festival, which we really enjoyed, but with our resources that we had, which were quite limited, of course. But we had a lot of fun, and there was also at the end for me, also as a filmmaker, quite a learning process in the sense of, like getting to know the other side, thinking about simplicity in the sense of, like also with a small thing and with a few seconds, you maybe can tell something that is important to somebody. And, also the collaborative aspects as well were quite interesting for me compared to, sometimes creating films on my own. So, and I'm still talking about collaborations that happened back then, or that were established back then. For example, yes, and that's the second, back then when I was in Linz, and, being sometimes a bit like also arrogant in the sense of, I don't need this institution for that. I can do this on my own as well. And my, another person who became a friend of mine and a colleague was Robert Praxmarer. And, we also had this sort of pride, we'll do these things on our own. In that case, totally different, like the Flipbook Festival. In that case, it was read about, like audiovisual things and synesthesia and, sharing our expertises. Let's put it that way. Robert comes from programming and but he also was a great artist already back then. And you know, me coming from animation and motion graphics, etc., photography is also quite an important part. So we try to share our things and create some, on the one hand, also some sort of experimental films or animations, but on the other hand, also media performances and concert visualizations. So we basically started a little bit in clubs, as you can see here, and in the sense of with live visuals, you know, like, and Robert was programming his own engine. And for me, it was sort of also a new field, you know, coming from filmmaking, everything is fixed and prepared. And suddenly another guy says to you, no, we do this all live, you know, like, of course, we prepared things. Uh, this was basically our mixture of me, you know, like working with, also with, you don't really see it here. This was created in Prague during a residency, you know, like some subway images, and, you know, like me being interested in photography, etc. Okay, what I wanted to say, there was humor in there, as you can maybe see here. Cats are always good in presentations, I guess. So also as visuals in clubs, we had the experience. But you know, there was also this artistic aspects for creating maybe something experimental and new with our possibilities, with our own engine, etc. So from clubs, things became maybe more relevant to us somewhere and more important. Orchestra visualizations. This was for the Ars Electronica festival. This was it's already some years. This was 2000. Okay, I'll try. So I was in this part talking about In Out, this collective of Robert and me working, you know, compared the flipbook stuff that I showed before and the festival, totally different in the field of media arts, synesthesia, audiovisual, visuals, audiovisual experiments from clubs up to orchestra concerts. And I think this was the last slide that I showed where I was talking about two projects. On the left side, it's called CPU, Central Processing Unit, der Prozess, based on Kafka's Prozess, with 4 live performance and stereoscopic images. And on the right hand side, Versus, which is, yes, an ongoing topic for me, like also stereoscopic images, which of course you cannot see now, unfortunately, and with one dancer, with Nanina Kotlovsky. And yes, this ongoing questioning, like the connection between human being and the machine or the algorithm. So this was these two experiments that were not experiments, these two projects that were quite important to us, and where we learned so much about everything, about you know, being a director, working on all those images, on all those visuals, all the technical issues, etc., etc. So, and you know, like with this collective called In Out, yeah, we learned a lot in this process somewhere between 2003 until 2015. We learned a lot about, you know, the pros and cons of a small team, you know, like being everything, you know, being the director, being the filmmaker, being the technician, being the projectionist, etc., etc. So there was really many issues that we learned, and it was on the one hand really we were quite flexible. On the one hand, being a collective of two people, but on the other hand, you know, there was so many issues, of course, working too much on all these things. And of course, in that case, we really went for, you know, like being, you know, contributing to the arts world and working for the arts. And we learned a lot in that sense as well, you know, the arts and the money. Like, you know, for example, maybe, you know, we were younger, and then, you know, sometimes you were saying, the money is okay. And so, but, you know, afterwards you realized, okay, it was too much of work for that amount of money. So we learned a lot. And, you know, like, as I said, this two people collective, I think sooner or later, Robert was a bit maybe also frustrated about the arts world. And he, you know, like somehow it happened that he started teaching and I also started teaching at Art University in Linz. And I think for him, this was a good foundation, the teaching, to also try to establish his own company, which went a little bit into a different direction, like rather interactive games in connection with maybe educating people. This was quite important to him. And me personally, I maybe also left a little bit this sort of art world in the sense of media art, projecting performances, media performances, which we are still interested, which we were afterwards also still interested in, but it was sometimes difficult. And now it's getting even more difficult for me to go on because yes, now it's this is the toughest slide for me in this presentation, because unfortunately it's a huge loss. Robert died this January, but I want to. It's important for me to mention this here because, yeah, of course, he was a very important person to me. We learned so much from each other. So wherever he may be now, I'm quite sure he also already will have his own street and his own district. And I hope wherever he will be now, he's going on with his persona. You know, he was such an honest, unique person, and I'm quite sure wherever he may be now, he will still go on with creating fantastic projects with all his honesty and all his unique ideas. Yes, this was important to mention for me. And for me, you know, like I'm switching now to the collective that I'm still part of, since, you know, I started step by step. The first projects were in 2005 with the collective called Extra, which is based in Salzburg and Vienna. And, you know, compared to my individual work, we work here a lot in, you know, of course, in a collective, like core team of 6 people in the field of documentary games, let's call it like that. And Gold Extra originally started with public performances and also became a music label, became a lot over all these years. You know, like it started somehow in, I think, 1999. I joined in 2005, and from year to year, it got more and more projects. You know, like also what is important to us to talk, to tell students and pupils, to discuss things, to work on games and also performances. Sometimes with a very critical aspect, you know, like thinking, and you know, like I will, you know, like this image should say, I cannot say a lot here now during this presentation, you know, just a tiny fragment of all these projects that we do and did. And, you know, like in that case, you know, just to give you an overview, for example, from 2014, we worked on an augmented reality project, which was connected to Ethnologic Museum in Berlin, you know, bringing artifacts to life, you know, like objects that are there in a vitrine, you know, behind the glass, and suddenly they come to life through augmented reality. And, you know, what I will talk now a little bit more is, on the one hand, this uh, documentary game called From Darkness, which is a lot based on our research and on our journey to Nairobi and to Uganda, you know, where we interviewed so many people. And I think here's also some slides. You know, we went to Nairobi, we went to Uganda, we went to Kampala, and we discussed and interviewed, for example, teachers, nurses, community workers, urban refugees in Nairobi, etc., etc. And then we came back with all this material and decided, hey, can we do our own format out of it? And so we put all what we experienced into Unity engine and decided on a project called From Darkness, which has you know, some game aspects in there. Basically, you try to find your daughter. So you are the mother of a journalist's daughter, and she got lost somewhere in Nairobi. So that's the last thing that you could hear of her, that she's in Nairobi. So you try to find her, and you meet, on your trying to find her, you meet specific people and that maybe knew her. So that's sort of the game story. But, you know, sooner or later in the process of working on it, we realized it should be quite close to our game, to our journey, and to the people we met, of course. So I will show you now just some images. And yeah, it's, as I said, it's you know, you can interact with these characters that you see. And what was quite important to us was also, you know, including our also the atmospheres that we saw there, the images that we saw there, and create our own worlds out of it with our resources. We didn't have millions of euros to work on that, but this level, that's one of 10 levels, and it gives you an idea. This is for us, this was the Kibera level, some sort of more problematic area in Nairobi. And like all these atmospheres and images that we saw, that we tried to put in there, and all the interviews. So we talk to people, and you also in the game have this sort of book where you can write down your notes and your experiences that you had, and you can also discuss that way with specific characters. That's Fatuma. She's, of course, at the end, the real person working in Kibera, working as a community worker. And you can, through these drop down menus, you can also ask her questions. And she's talking about the community and about her community work. So From Darkness to Our Minds was quite an interesting project in the sense of combining what we're interested in, also documentary fields, with games. And speaking about life realities was an important thing. And also our life reality right now is, speaking of 2021, we currently create a sort of documentary escape room, which will be released the first time in June 2021 in Salzburg. So basically, it's somehow, it has some similarities From Darkness, in the sense of you also have specific levels, so to speak, and you can experience specific lives that we have, that are colleagues of us, and that we have been interviewing. For example, Mara is a dancer. She grew up in Caracas in Venezuela, and you have specific challenges, and during these challenges and tasks, you can follow her life. She's how she tried from back then in Venezuela, in Caracas, getting to the US, and from the US getting to Europe. And she lives now in London. So basically, you can in this sort of projected room, which is 6 meter, 0.6 meter, 0.3 meter height. So you are like an audience of 7 or 8 people can be in this space, and and being there's all these challenges to do, and these projected walls around, so you have to try through specific tasks to get from level, specific scenes or levels, and getting to know specific people who had their struggles in life and their challenges in life, being an artist and trying to go on with your artistic life, and trying to make a stable thing out of it. And yes, here, just as a next slide, just a little video of it. There's this one part which is about the golden passport, sort of, like the European passport. The Fortress Europe is sometimes a topic in our work, and in that case, it's about throwing the golden passport over the wall. So like, just to give you a few hints about our Gold Extra work From Darkness, and this one is called Border Grid. If you happen to be in Salzburg, please go there in June. It's, I guess, quite an interesting project. So, and yeah, lessons learned with Gold Extra, or lessons that we still learn. It's interesting for us to create new formats that are connected to our interests, which are somehow documentary, which are somehow also media performances, of course, in my case, animation. So we try to combine our things with basically with reality, or with collecting stories that we think are relevant, of colleagues, or listening to people, interviewing people. And on the other hand, which was quite an interesting thing for us always, is to share this information and knowledge of what we maybe learned, and to give it to students or pupils. So there's still a lot to learn, and it's, I think, quite interesting to work on these sort of new formats, in the sense of games, augmented reality installations, and so on and so on. And coming rather to the close of this talk, with some half an hour break in between, I want to get back to my animated experiments. Just I'll try to keep it quick, to keep it simple now. And like I'm jumping back now into 2012. I wanted to pick out at least 2 or 3 animations that were quite important to me, where I think I also learned. And one of them was a music video, which is called "If We Had Only Tried." And this was sort of, to my mind, such a nice playground to like, on the one hand, it's also somehow documentary in the sense of, like, so there's some shots from Vienna in there, there's some shots in there from other journeys, there's of course a lot of stop motion in there, and some really, to my mind, playfulness and stupid ideas. And I enjoyed back then, this playground of fragments, and trying to put them together in a music video. um, uh, Now it's of course a little bit stupid that there's no sound on, but I thought it makes it more complicated also with sound. So I'll leave you here with the images, some of the stuff you can find online. And like in that case, it was this playground, also traveling around, also some biographic things in there from my flat, some references in there from other animations. So I enjoyed that one. And quite different, but somehow also, this is now 2016, a project called Exterrat. And this is also somehow similar in the sense of the playground idea, like just experimenting and creating fragments, and maybe they fit together. With Exterrat, it's about, I had a residency in Paris, and it was summer, but at the end still this quite dark film came out. And like, this was a lot based on faces that are on the streets, street art, creating my own faces out of it, like through montage and mosaic and putting things together, and creating this. What is the next one? Is this already the video? Okay, I'll stay here for a second still. There was this residency in Paris, and and also it is still, it was still got some park animated, so it's called a documentary. I saw specifically depicted them and created animated fragments. So here's some shots mainly based on faces, and the transitions were quite important to me, somehow mixing analog and digital. And there's some dark in there, also about like homelessness. Or now there's also some transition to a quite interesting part to me, like experimenting with an ice block. I put a photograph into an ice block, I let it melt, and suddenly there's the transition again to the digital transformation of faces. And also in that case, a little bit of experimenting with morphs. So you don't see that much of Paris right now in there, but there was aspects of Paris in there as well. It's somehow, it was also, urban research for me, and trying to put in there what I saw. I like this transition of the soldier, and suddenly the soldier is gone, and the army of creativity stays. And it's a drawing that I found there, or that I saw there somewhere. And I try to put all these things together and do this sort of documentary animation about, well, some darker aspects of Paris, some street art in Paris, and creating my own images out of it. Yeah, here you can see some photographs. It was summer. I was experimenting. Faces was quite important to me. Textures were quite important. The city was, of course, important. And also here you can see a little bit the stupid transition, as you can see it here. Like, it was really a photograph that I tore apart, a green screen behind, and with I blew the photograph away, and the next phase evolved, something like that. Exterrat. And with these sort of projects, my individual animation approaches, which shouldn't be, I'm not so good in drawing, rather like, there's so many ways in animation that can be quite different, you know, like, and in my case, it's rather about maybe traveling. I was lucky to have some chances to travel and to take a look at cities and trying to create animations out of it. And of course, it was quite great for me from 2012 on to get a little bit of people, you know, to go to festivals, to be lucky to be invited sometimes to festivals. And, you know, this is of course also a huge thing to learn, get to know people, to talk to people, you know, all these approaches that are possible in animation to them. There's not the one, you know, like, yeah, all these things. And for me, it was also the lesson learned that, you know, also with compared, you know, like it is in with Gold Extra, to somehow stay connected to reality, to take a look at things. And also in animation, there's so much possible also with documentary in animation, you know, like you can create your own worlds, which is a fantastic thing. So here we are. I'm trying to quit now, or coming to an end. We're in the present time now. This, I will not show this now anymore. That's Time of the Signs, which is which was, well, I would say, quite at many festivals. And once again, coming back to 2001, my first animation. This also deals with the topic of, you know, like being slave to our devices, in that case where the mobile phones and screen, you know, and sort of isolated character going through the same day basically on and on, and you know, like, yeah, that's the topic behind this animation. And currently, for example, you could watch it at Independent Shorts is starting, and it's somehow involved there. And also there's this thing called Shorts, which is a collaboration of various film festivals. And I think it's part in there connected to ASIFA Austria, which was also a topic at the beginning of the talk, and so on. So, and yeah, maybe this is one more thing that I want to mention about this one. Basically, it's the sort of first project or the most narrative project that I ever tried. And this is, you know, like, I have huge respect to directors who go into this narrative animation topic, or, you know, because it is also, of course, quite a tough challenge to create narrative animations. And for me, it was basically sort of the first one, or the most narrative one. Of course, it's still experimental. And yeah, coming to now, again, an example, and it's the same thing, you know, still in Hämid, which I showed before, you know, like taking a look at things, but in the case, taking another look, you know, like this is about rather taking a, you know, my hometown or my home area, and you know, like trying to find new things in things that you trying to, you know, like you are so used, I'm so used to this area around my home place, so I didn't take a look at it anymore. And during lockdown, it was quite interesting to take another new look at things and to create, you know, like, and taking a look at the beauty of simplicity, somehow like that. That's what I would say, in connection to, of course, some stupid Corona parts in there, because they just, you know, it was and is a topic. So I included it into this diary of days during lockdown. So yeah, I'm at the end basically. There's still so many lessons to learn, and I think I don't have any conclusio, because to my mind, you know, I hope I could show you some projects that, you know, like, that worked somehow for me, in the sense of getting to find my career and trying to get new, uh, you know, like, learning. That was my way. But especially in animation, there's so many possibilities and ways. If you're good in drawing, it can be quite help, you know, it's definitely also a way just to work on hand-drawn animation. In my case, I always felt comfortable to switch between disciplines and fields and collectives somehow as well, or collectives and individual works. But you know, this worked for me, and that's why I also called this talk, or this masterclass, Encounters and In-Betweens, in the sense of encounters, you know, like maybe having the luck of traveling around and taking a look at things, and in-betweens, besides the fact that it's a term of animation, also in between disciplines and fields and formats. So once again, okay, here's some links like goldextra.com. subcute.servos is my website, which is, yes, maybe you also find some other interesting projects there, and inout.com. So I'm at the end. Thanks a lot one more time to you guys from Animatricks Festival, and yes, thanks a lot.
Yeah, no, thank you. No, thank you, Reinhold. This wonderful. There were so many interesting projects in there. I was almost like at some points like overwhelmed that, oh no, because I mean I know you from a few years ago, and then I have seen a few of your installations and a few of your short films, and I thought that okay, that's probably most of it, and now I suddenly realized that that was probably just a fraction of it, like less than 10% or something. It's so wonderful to see these works, and I would say as a just a general comment that I'm really surprised about sort of your talent in the sense that that you because normally like if you have work experimenting and you're a visual artist, you kind of limit yourself to a few techniques, or at least that you go like really kind of just manual traditional materials and things like that, or you kind of focus on the CGI and computer graphics and the sort of virtual aspects. But I think you're one of these very few people who has done both a lot and then combined them in so many different ways, which actually kind of like surprises me that you know, and that they're so good. And I think like that's something that I don't think I've ever seen. I can't think of anybody at the moment. So
I mean, maybe it's a different way around, that maybe there's not this one specific talent that I'm, like, I think it would be easier somehow, like, yeah, as I said before, it's great if somebody realizes for himself, okay, I'm good at drawing, I will try to create my hand-drawn animations, and so on and so on. In my case, but of course it's also a thing of interest, in the sense of, like, I'm interested in 3D computer animation, but I'm also somehow interested in 2D hand-drawn animation, and like being involved into an institution like Future Lab, or also a collective like Gold Extra, or my, the other collective in Out, where we had such a focus on sometimes media art, sometimes performances. So, of course, I was lucky to learn a lot and to collaborate a lot. And of course, some of the projects you saw, the other, there's a group involved, in the sense of, especially if we're talking about games, you need so many people who are creating, you need programmers, you need sound artists. Once again, like sound sometimes in the project is also quite important, but it didn't show now because, yeah, things getting too complicated, etc. But what I wanted to say, especially with, for example, game projects, and that's what makes them beautiful, or also performances for theaters or whatever, that it's a group thing, that it's not the one person creating, like his own ideas, but that it's such a collaborative thing. And of course, animation, by the way, of course, is as well. If we're talking about professional, narrative animations, of course it's a group thing as well. But like for me, I think I was quite lucky to get to know programmers who think sometimes a little bit different, but who can be fantastic artists as well, and so on and so on, like. And this is what also interests me, as I mentioned in the talk anyway, the switching between maybe sometimes doing something on my own, but always having this haven of, like a collective where it's about other topics sometimes, and about a group effort. Yeah.
yeah, that's what I was gonna ask you about the community, but you already like answered that. Yeah, it seems to be that in because to me it's a surprise also in that sense, because I generally it's in the animation festivals it's because I think there is not an actual animation school in Austria, that there's very little like in animation. And I was talking to it with Thomas Renolder, and then he said that yeah, that is the problem, there's not one in here. But then if you go, as soon as you go to experimental and to new media, there's a huge and very talented Austrian community that mostly centered around is in Linz and Vienna, most of them. But that's that seems to like there's a lot in that. So yeah, just like see these old experimental works, and Thomas Reinhold is one of the persons who have one of the best experimental films. And then I think he also does, because I got to know him first when he did a lecture in, I think it was in Animatricks, Bucharest, about the history of Austrian animation. And the first animation he showed was a black and white from the 1990s, made in Austria. I think it was an advert for Philips or some other company, which actually didn't look like an advert at all. It was a 5 or 6 minute, very well made piece animation from 1920s that was somehow by accident discovered. It was completely lost. He said that because he also works in collaboration, and he said it was like people knew that there something existed, and somebody found like a film roll in its attic, and turned out to be this one of these few lost animations. And then he is the person who goes around in the world showing these in the festivals. Yeah. So there is this sense, and I'm actually really happy to have you here, and through you and Thomas, we've been noticing that in Austria there has been something, and then there is the modern version is sort of like the experimental work that you do, and it seems to be like such a vibrant community. And
of course there is some history, but I think as you said.
Okay. Oh, yes. Sorry, I wasn't hearing it. Sorry, he says that don't share the presentation. We can sort of like, then we can have the camera on you if you want to.
Sorry.
Yeah. Because it won't automatically will go to when us. Okay. Yeah, I forgot about it as well. No problem. Yes.
I totally forgot as well. But we have
no,
now this.
No, it's okay. It's okay. No, it's true. Now you can see it better. Yeah, okay. I completely forget that also. It's over there. Switch the system, but yes, exactly. So thank you so much for this, and we talked about this community, and can you tell us what is next for you? Like, what do you have like a next project for?
I mean, on the one hand, we are quite excited with Gold Extra, with the project called Border Grid, which I showed before, this escape documentary room. We are quite excited about this one and where it brings us. It's going to be also some technical issue to show it. It's also quite complex and so on, but currently we're working on that. And afterwards, there's also some collective projects that I cannot mention yet. Some of them maybe go into an augmented reality direction. And for me personally, I think I want to go on rather with the hopefully it's sooner or later possible to travel again, like maybe establishing or creating an animation that is connected to traveling again. And on the other hand, as a sort of backup, I also would love to do something about Vienna, like I have specific ideas, but I cannot talk yet about it, like taking a look at specific aspects of Vienna, and there's so many of them, and so, it's a fantastic city. So, and creating either also a sort of animated experimental film out of it, or maybe a sort of installation sort of thing, maybe also connected to augmented reality. But that's just currently I'm quite lucky that rather there's still sort of two sort of quite new films, so I don't feel the pressure to create my next animated film at the moment. But sooner or later it will come. Definitely, the interest will the like the drive and the energy will be there again to say, hey, I want to create the next one.
No, sounds great. I have to ask about about AR and VR, because you're mentioning these projects like that, or generally about the projects that you had. Have you had any which had like were presented as a virtual reality or augmented reality project?
I mean, we did some research with the project From Darkness that I showed, this documentary game. We did some research to put this into virtual reality. We were collaborating with a university in Upper Austria, which was quite great for us. It was some sort of research project, a research grant, where we decided, hey, does it work out for us to put our games, there's also other ones which have rather important topics, does it work out to transport them or transfer them into virtual reality?
Mm-hmm.
And, it was research, and the answer is maybe, as always, yes and no. There was specific aspects that really worked out, but in general, I would say you cannot take a project that you did somehow different and just put it somewhere else. Like projects start with an idea and a specific format. And especially with virtual reality, I think it's a little bit problematic still, like in this, I really like if you have those glasses on and some things you see are fantastic. But, like, especially in a year where we have been locked up for quite long and so often, I don't know if virtual reality is currently the right format to show things. I think if I want to go into a museum now again, it should rather be a collective thing, like an experience where you enjoy something together. And virtual reality on the one hand has this problem of you lock yourself up in your own world, which is fantastic. But for me, it's just currently, I think, not the right time for it. And
also, none of your previous projects weren't in VR either, like the ones that you presented. So none of them had a VR.
Not, we tried it out to put some of them into VR, but we never had really the one project where we decided, we should show this in VR.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to know.
It was just our personal thing. We had the feeling with augmented reality, somehow it works better because it's maybe more connection to the real world, and also maybe to other people. You can rather make something interactive out of it compared to, it's just my personal opinion. And I sometimes had also the problem at animation festivals. Basically the projects that you see there are fantastic, so much better than what I can do. But on the other hand, how it's possible to show them is sometimes not so great. Like, I don't know, too many people, standing in a queue waiting to get their 5 minutes of seeing them. And also, speaking of the last pandemic year, also, like, I think it's currently also a rethinking in the sense of, okay, 200 people before me already had those glasses on. Should I also put them on? Like, it's in the sense, like, it's just one more topic concerning
of course.
How can you present these sort of things to many people? I don't know. In Annecy, there's 10,000 of people. How can you bring them closer a virtual reality project? Those 10,000 people.
I think that's a sort of cheaper, newer application that you can sort of like move around in the world. Like if you have something that you're just taking from city to city, because it's interesting to hear your comments. Because the reason I'm asking is that it seems to be like in Finland and Scandinavia, there are so many of these media artists, and that there seems to be this kind of rush to sort of transfer everything into VR and AR. And I feel to some degree, of course, I'm sort of not an expert, but I feel kind of that it's a bit too rushed and it's too forced, perhaps, that maybe people should think more like you do. And it's interesting to hear your comments that, for instance, in Austria, it doesn't, or at least with you and the groups you work with, there isn't this kind of, let's say, forced push that, okay, because now we have VR and we didn't have it with the same quality and technology 10 years ago. Now we have to transfer everything to VR without actually thinking whether this is actually going to work or is it going to be any better. So really, like the augmented reality, is it really augmenting it or not? Is it just sort of ruining the whole concept? So this is interesting to hear.
Just as one thing, we had this one project that a computer, rather on a laptop and on a computer, also a documentary game that deals with Ukrainian conflict. And, like we also tried it out in VR then, like taking what we had in Unity engine and putting it into VR. and it just felt too funny then. It was such an important project to us in the sense of having a specific topic, and speaking about in this project, speaking about conflict and war in general, and suddenly you have those VR glasses on, and like the technic fascination is about you can go there and you can go there and you can walk there, etc. It just, to our minds, didn't fit to what we wanted to tell with the project. So we had the feeling, we definitely have the feeling, not every idea and not every story can be put into VR. It has to be thought out and carefully.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's really. The other thing that comes to mind for me is that you had this project. Yeah, there was the project in these Kenyan slums of Nairobi, I believe, and then there was the one with the borders that had some people from Venezuela. These ones, they seem to be like kind of humanitarian projects. Is that something that you and your collaborators have started themselves, or are you kind of like sponsored by some sort of what is it called, like Amnesty or
I mean, originally we started these projects on our own. We are quite lucky that, for example, with Gold Extra, we are, this collective exists since 1999, and we worked on so many projects. So from year to year, we do somehow, and we are quite lucky that we have some foundation, money foundation, that we are being financed by the states, by we have been financed from the region of Salzburg, the city of Salzburg, the from Austria, etc., etc. So we have our base, and then we sometimes, quite often try to finance the project with further money. But for example, with From Darkness, this was the project in Nairobi. We started with the idea and we tried to start with it, and then suddenly some other money resources came out of having the first part, which goes into the direction what you said. It was not Amnesty, but of course we got in contact then with specific institutions that helped us in one or the other way, with money or with helping us in Nairobi and so on. So it's, ideas start and suddenly they grow, and suddenly we realize, hey, maybe the money from state funding is not enough. We should take a look at other options that maybe come up, and we were lucky sometimes that they come up.
Yeah, but it's interesting, and of course, certainly, like that. I think humanitarian organizations, they could use this as an application, because I think this Nairobi project, it was quite interesting to have this kind of a like, in a way, like a mystery game happening in an actual slum, because I've heard of this. It's one of the largest slums in the world, the one in Nairobi, and this is quite interesting that you sort of make it into this attractive game or application that actually interests a lot of people, and therefore opening people's eyes into this actual problem and finding solutions through this sort of clever plot or interesting story that you've come up with here.
I mean, for us, especially with From Darkness, it was quite important. You mentioned before attractive. I don't know if this is the right term.
More attractive than what is the actual reality in the slum. That's what I mean.
No. But on the other hand, what we really wanted to bring across is, like, it can be quite dangerous if you just show misery and like, especially from a European perspective. So we definitely tried, and we met so many people who were so enthusiastic about contributing something to their community. So this was very important to us, to rather listen to the people, what they want to say and what they have to say, compared to making our own stories out of it or interpretations out of it. This was quite important to us, and this is where we learned so much with school kids who had such a pride, or also as I mentioned, priests or community workers, who were collaborating so much in a so positive way, where we thought as Austrians, like, okay, we can really learn so much from them.
No, but yeah, that's what I meant. That by sort of listening to them, you know their story, you know their problems, and then you present their problems not by just a regular news report, which is not necessarily so interesting to watch, and people I don't know necessarily those kind of things, they've kind of lost their effect. So the way you're interpreting it and putting it into a, let's say, a game format, that makes it interesting for so many more people. So basically, their story gets told to a wider audience in a more, let's say, memorable way. I suppose that's what I meant. That I
But
think that's great to see from you.
of course, these game formats are, for us, it is of course an experiment. I totally understand if people see, hey, no, that's not the right way for me. You know, I don't want to play a game that has those problematic topics. But you know, for us, it was an experiment, maybe also to reach another audience, to you know, talk in schools about the projects. The first one that we created was in 2010. I was hardly involved out of other reasons, but you know, this was called Frontiers, which dealt with the, you know, with once again the Fortress Europe. You know, like it was also a research journey back then to, for example, Ceuta in Spain, you know, like also doing interviews and research on borders and creating this game about the Fortress Europe, where,
Which is
yeah,
very topical right now. I mean, if you just listen to the news, Ceuta has been in the
yeah,
news for 3-4 days, and
yeah,
constantly
definitely,
these migrants trying to cross the
yeah,
Mediterranean Sea into Europe. That is a very topical thing, and
yeah.
yeah, that's the
And
other one, as you rightfully say. It's a very good topic to discuss in through art, as you have done.
uh,
So
and sorry, just one more sentence about Frontiers there. And suddenly, you know, we experimented, we tried to create it. It took us years because this was quite difficult already back then. Uh, Still back then, you know, things changed since then, but it was suddenly it was there, and suddenly we had the feeling it was at the right time, because you know, suddenly people heard of it, journalists heard of it, and suddenly we were in German television in Tagesschau, which is the news format there, etc., etc. So yeah, I
no,
think experimenting in these sort of formats always helped us to, I don't know, to go on and to
yeah,
find our path.
yeah, and spread the sort of word further in an interesting way. So yeah, I think we're kind of almost running out of time. But if you can, like, briefly, for me, it would be interesting that since you've used so many different kind of techniques in your work, do you have a favorite that, or like, let's
Yeah,
say that would be the easiest technique to use for, let's say, for your next film or upcoming films?
yeah. I mean, you know, I said before that I'm not that talented in drawing. You know, what I really like is, to some extent, I like stop motion. We're speaking of animation and you know, putting away now games and all those technologies, etc. I think stop motion is fantastic. It is so much life, and you know, me personally, I'm sometimes trying to combine stop motion techniques with what I see, and you know, like sometimes my goal is to put things together that necessarily don't fit together at first, but you know, like finding ways to put them together. And you know, like I also like those, I'm a fan of of a festival like, I guess you heard of it, Stop Trick, the stop motion festival that is happening in Maribor, etc., etc. So that's, but you know, on the other hand, the beauty of animation is that there's so much there's so many techniques and so much possible, and you know, every year you're astonished about all those fantastic filmmakers who create so many beautiful things in all these techniques. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. No, but this is so wonderful to hear, and thank you so much for your time. And we apologize for these really bad like technical problems, but gladly, like, this will be recorded. This is recorded, and so the version that will be online, it will be edited. So you know, people.
This would be great
Yeah,
to
yeah, yeah.
edit.
So sorry about
Please
this.
edit out the pause
Yeah,
when we
yeah, we
talk
won't leave
about.
leave like a 20-minute pause in the middle. No, they will be all right and online. I think, you know, it will be fine. I think today is such
Cool.
a sunny day that probably there weren't that many people watching it live either, because it's been the first sunny day for so many, like more than a week or two or something. So definitely most people will watch the recorded version, which will be good, and definitely enjoy your wonderful work and career that you presented so well to us. So
Thanks a lot again, and see you soon.
see you soon. Thank you, Reinhold. Have a nice summer. Wonderful. Thank you, and goodbye.
Ciao.
Ciao,
Bye.
ciao, ciao.
Bye.
Tschüss. Ciao.